Chapter 1. Flames of Youth. The name Triss Merigold is often spoken with warmth, as if a very presence is enough to drive away the lingering cold of a long night. She is remembered not as the most powerful sorceress of her age, nor as the most cunning. Those honors belong to others, to Philippa Eilhart with her endless plots, or Yennefer of Vengerberg with her sharp wit and untamed spirit. Yet Triss, with her auburn hair and quiet resilience, became something rarer. She became trusted. Long before her name carried weight across the continent, she was simply Triss. Born in Temeria, her early life is mostly hidden in the mist of time, her childhood lost to history and shadowed by the scars of a world forever at war. What is known is that she possessed the spark, that raw, unpredictable energy that marks a person for magic. It manifested not as a violent explosion of power, but as a quiet warmth. Her tutors would later describe her magic as fire-tamed, yet alive. She was sent, like many girls of promise, to the island of Thaned to Aretuza, the Academy of Sorceresses. There, under the cold gaze of the great teachers, she learned discipline. She learned to weave chaos into order, to turn the raw current of magic into something sharp, precise, and elegant. Aretuza was not a kind place. Young women trained there were stripped of naivety and reforged into weapons of influence. They were taught that beauty and power were two sides of the same coin, and both could bend kings to their knees. Triss was different. Her beauty was undeniable, but her heart was not easily hardened. Where others learned cruelty as a tool, she retained an uncommon softness, a refusal to see people as mere pawns. It was a trait that many considered weakness, but in time it would become her greatest strength. During her years at Aretuza, Triss quickly gained a reputation for talent. She excelled in healing magic, a school often overlooked by those seeking raw, destructive power. To her, the art of healing was not lesser, it was essential. While others created firestorms and lightning, Triss learned how to save lives when the battle was done, how to mend what war had broken. Her affinity for fire remained, but unlike the wild flames of other mages, her fire was controlled, warm, inviting, deadly only when necessary. Triss's first steps into the wider world of politics and war came during a time of unrest. The northern kingdoms were restless. Nilfgaard's shadow grew long, its black banners already threatening the borders of Temeria and Sintra. While many sorceresses played at politics from behind veils of secrecy, Triss was drawn into events directly. Her loyalty to Temeria placed her under the service of King Foltest, a ruler known for his pragmatism and his complicated personal life. It was during these early years that Triss began to see the true cost of war. She did not simply read about battles in dusty scrolls. She walked among the wounded, saw the faces of soldiers broken beyond repair, and felt their pain through her own hands. Her healing skills, combined with her unwavering compassion, earned her respect far beyond the courts. Soldiers whispered her name with gratitude, calling her the sorceress with the warm touch. But kindness is dangerous in a world ruled by steel and blood. While other mages built walls between themselves and the world, Triss let the world touch her, and it would cost her more than she could imagine. She met Yennefer of Vengerberg during this period, a meeting that would forever shape her life. The two could not have been more different. Yennefer was sharp as a blade, every word carefully chosen, every glance a weapon. Triss was softer, more forgiving, yet a strange bond grew between them, one forged not of similarity, but of understanding. Yennefer often mocked her for her naivety, but there was a quiet respect behind the teasing. Triss, in turn, admired Yennefer's strength, even when it bordered on ruthlessness. Through Yennefer, she would eventually cross paths with Geralt of Rivia. At first, Geralt was simply another witcher, another man shaped by destiny and misfortune. But to Triss, he was something more. She saw in him not just the cold precision of a monster hunter, but a man capable of deep loyalty, and though he would never admit it, deep love. Their friendship would grow into something complicated, something neither fully understood, and something that would forever be overshadowed by Yennefer. But that is a story for later. In those early days, Triss's greatest trial was yet to come. The brewing storm between the North and Nilfgaard was no longer a distant threat. It was on her doorstep. She was drawn into the conflict almost by accident, though perhaps nothing in the world of sorceresses is truly accidental. Her work with Temeria placed her close to key political figures, and her name was soon whispered in the halls of power. She was not just a healer now. She was a strategist, an advisor, a voice that kings and generals listened to. But war does not care for kindness. It grinds it down. It was at Sodden Hill that Triss's fire was truly tested. The Battle of Sodden is remembered as one of the bloodiest conflicts in the history of the continent. It was not a battle for territory nor for glory, but for survival. Nilfgaard's armies marched north with a force that seemed unstoppable, burning villages, crushing kingdoms, and leaving nothing but ash in their wake. The northern kingdoms, fractured and bickering, finally united in desperation. 13 sorcerers and sorceresses, some of the most powerful in history, stood at the forefront of that battle. Among them was Triss Merigold. She was young then, barely tested, but when the fires of war rose, so did she. On that hill, surrounded by death and despair, she unleashed her full power. Flames danced like living things at her fingertips, searing the armored legions of Nilfgaard. But even her flames could not shield her from the cost. She was struck down during the battle, gravely wounded, and for a time it was believed she had died. Her name was etched into the monument alongside the other fallen heroes of Sodden. The 14th of Sodden, they called her. But Triss did not die. Not truly. She survived, scarred not just in body but in spirit. And when she rose again, she rose with a new understanding of who she was. She was not Yennefer, she was not Philippa, she was not a schemer or a queenmaker. She was Triss Merigold, and her fire burned for those who could not fight for themselves. The story of Sodden changed her. When she returned to Temeria, she did so as someone different, someone who had seen what war could take and what it could not kill. Her reputation grew, but so did her doubts. She began to see the games of sorceresses for what they were, manipulations that cost lives, and though she would remain part of that world, part of the lodge that would form in the years to come, she would never truly belong to it. Triss's loyalty was not to power, it was to people. To those she could heal, to those she could protect, to those who would never even know her name. Chapter 2: The Lodge and the Wars. Triss Merigold's life after Sodden Hill was never the same. The girl who had once been known for her kindness, for her warmth, now carried the weight of battle like an invisible crown. She had faced death and returned, and though her body healed, her spirit bore scars. When she closed her eyes at night, she still saw the flames. Not her own, but the flames that consumed soldiers on both sides, the faces twisted in pain, the silence that followed. She would never forget the smell of burned earth, or the cries, or the sudden bitter stillness when the battle was over. In the years following the battle, Triss became something of a symbol. The 14th of Sodden was more than a title, it was a story told across the continent. Soldiers spoke of her courage, of how she had stood shoulder to shoulder with heroes like Yennefer of Vengerberg and Vilgefortz of Roggeveen. But Triss herself did not think of herself as a hero. She saw only the lives she could not save, the friends she had lost, and the war that was far from over. The northern kingdoms had won at Sodden, but it was a victory of survival, not triumph. Nilfgaard had retreated, but it would return, stronger and more determined. The kings of the north, already suspicious of one another, began to prepare for the inevitable. And in their courts, as always, the sorcerers and sorceresses plotted. It was during this period of tension that the Lodge of Sorceresses began to take shape. The Lodge was the brainchild of Philippa Eilhart, the brilliant and ruthless sorceress of Redania. Philippa believed that the world should not be ruled by kings or queens, not when sorceresses, with their intellect and power, could guide the fate of the continent more effectively. The Lodge was to be a council of the most influential sorceresses, working in secret to shape politics, prevent chaos, and, when necessary, wage war from the shadows. Triss was invited into the Lodge. At first, she was uncertain. The Lodge's goals, though noble on the surface, were steeped in manipulation and schemes. Philippa was not interested in kindness. She wanted control, the kind of control that only those who can pull the strings of kings can achieve. And yet, Triss accepted the invitation, perhaps out of duty, perhaps because she believed that from within she could temper Philippa's more ruthless instincts. She was never fully comfortable in the Lodge. She found herself surrounded by women like Kira Metz, Sheila de Tanzeville, and Sabrina Glevisic, brilliant, ambitious, and often merciless. They saw nations as pieces on a board. Kings were pawns. People were numbers. And though Triss understood the necessity of strategy, she could not ignore the faces behind those numbers. Her role in the Lodge was often as a mediator. When tempers flared, when the games of power threatened to spiral into chaos, Triss's voice was the one that urged caution. Her compassion made her an outsider among the Lodge's core, but it also made her indispensable. Even Philippa, though she would never admit it, valued Triss's ability to see beyond politics, to care about the consequences of their decisions. Yet even as she navigated the dangerous waters of sorceress politics, Triss's ties to Temeria deepened. King Foltest relied on her counsel more than he relied on his own advisors. Her position in his court gave her influence, but also responsibility. Temeria was a kingdom forever on the edge of conflict, with Nilfgaard to the south and treacherous neighbors to the north. Triss became both shield and strategist, advising Foltest not just on magic, but on matters of diplomacy and war. It was also during this time that her bond with Geralt of Rivia grew stronger. Triss and Geralt had known each other before Sodden, but the aftermath of the battle brought them closer. Geralt, ever the wanderer, was drawn into the chaos of the Northern Wars more than once, and Triss often found herself by his side. She admired his quiet strength, his refusal to be drawn into the games of kings and sorceresses. Where others sought power, Geralt sought only to keep the balance and to protect those few he cared for. Their relationship was complicated. For Triss, it was more than friendship. She felt a warmth toward Geralt that went beyond mere admiration. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, blunt, stubborn, and yet capable of surprising tenderness. But there was always Yennefer. Yennefer, with her raven-black hair and unshakable bond with Geralt, stood like a shadow between them. Triss knew that Geralt's heart belonged to Yennefer, and yet, in moments of weakness, in times when Yennefer was absent, she allowed herself to hope. Their brief romance, born in part from Geralt's amnesia and in part from Triss's unspoken longing, would leave a scar on them both. Triss would always carry guilt for that time. Guilt for taking advantage of Geralt's memory loss. Guilt for stepping into Yennefer's place, even if only for a fleeting moment. But it was not a story of betrayal. It was a story of love, flawed, messy, human. Beyond matters of the heart, Triss's role in the wars continued to grow. She became a key figure in the fight against Nilfgaard, working not just as a sorceress but as a diplomat. Her ability to heal, both physically and emotionally, made her a bridge between factions. She was trusted, not because she wielded fear, but because she offered hope. Still, the Lodge demanded loyalty. Philippa's vision was clear. The sorceresses would shape the future of the North, whether the kings liked it or not. Triss was caught between this vision and her own sense of morality. The Lodge's plans were often ruthless. They spoke of controlling bloodlines, of placing rulers on thrones, of using magic, not for protection, but for manipulation. Triss disagreed with much of it, and yet she stayed. Perhaps because she knew that walking away would not stop them. Perhaps because she believed that, with her presence, she could prevent the worst outcomes. As the years passed, Triss's reputation only grew. She was no longer the young sorceress of Aretuza, no longer the girl who doubted herself. She was a woman who had stood at the edge of death and returned stronger. Her fiery hair and gentle smile became symbols of resilience. To the soldiers of Temeria, she was not just a mage. She was their 14th of Sodden, the sorceress who had bled for them. But for all her strength, Triss remained haunted. Haunted by Sodden. Haunted by Geralt. Haunted by the knowledge that the world she sought to protect was forever on the brink of destruction. And soon, that destruction would find her again. This time, in ways she could never have predicted. Chapter 3. The Battle of Sodden Hill. The hill was not meant to bear such weight. It was a quiet place once, a rise of green earth overlooking the river and the forests beyond. Farmers passed it on their way to markets and children played at its base, carving simple games into the dirt. No one had ever thought of it as a place of legend. But when Nilfgaard's black banners crossed the Yaruga, the hill became a fortress. It became the line between life and death for the north. The Second Nilfgaardian War was unlike anything the continent had seen before. The armies of the White Flames swept north like a storm of iron and fire. Cintra had already fallen, its proud queen dead, its people slaughtered or enslaved. The other kingdoms, Temeria, Redania, Kedwin, and Aedirn, hesitated at first, each hoping the storm would break over another land. But Nilfgaard's legions knew no boundaries, and when they reached the river, the North finally understood. This was not a war for land. This was a war for survival. The kings called for sorcerers, not just for counsel, but for war. Among the 13 who answered was Triss Merigold. She had never fought in a battle of such scale. She had seen war, yes, but Sodden was different. The hill was to be the last stand of the north, the place where Nilfgaard must be stopped. If the Black Army crossed the Yaruga, nothing would remain to halt its advance. Villages, cities, entire kingdoms would fall like wheat before a scythe. When Triss arrived, she found the hill already scarred with trenches and makeshift fortifications. The sorcerers and sorceresses worked alongside common soldiers, weaving wards, setting traps, reinforcing walls with magic and steel. Yennefer was there, her black hair wild in the wind, her violet eyes sharp with defiance. Vilgefortz of Roggeveen, tall and imposing, commanded the mages with a voice that brooked no argument. Sabrina Glevissig, Kira Metz, and others, all were ready to give their lives. The air buzzed with tension. You could feel it in the earth, in the way the grass seemed to bend as if anticipating fire. On the eve of battle, Triss stood on the crest of the hill, looking down at the endless black tide that gathered below. Nilfgaard's army was a monstrous thing, disciplined, relentless, stretching as far as the eye could see. The sight alone could break a soldier's heart. But Triss did not flinch. She could feel the chaos humming in her veins, ready to answer her call. Fire was her ally, and fire would meet steel. The night was long. No one slept. The soldiers sang songs, not of victory, but of memory. Songs to remind them of home, of families they might never see again. The mages prepared their spells, drawing sigils into the ground, whispering words of power into the dark. Triss walked among them, offering quiet encouragement. She healed wounds, calmed shaking hands, and smiled when others could not. In her presence, the soldiers found a strange comfort. She was not untouchable, not distant like so many of her kind. She was one of them, a flame burning not above them, but alongside them. The dawn brought death. Nilfgaard struck with the precision of a blade. Their cavalry surged forward first, a wall of black steel and lances. Behind them marched the infantry, shields locked, banners snapping in the wind. Siege engines rolled like thunder over the earth. The mages answered with fire. Triss raised her hands, and the air itself seemed to ignite. A storm of flame descended upon the front ranks of Nilfgaard's army, turning steel into molten rivers and men into shadows on the ground. But there was no time to rest. The legions pressed on, their sheer numbers threatening to crush the hill underfoot. Everywhere she turned, there was chaos. Sabrina conjured storms of ice to freeze the enemy's advance. Kira summoned illusions to scatter their formations. Yennefer, with a single gesture, tore apart entire ranks with black lightning that screamed as it struck. Triss fought beside them, her fire blazing brighter than it ever had before. Her hands burned raw from the energy, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Midway through the battle, an explosion rocked the hill. A Nilfgaardian mage, hidden among the ranks, had breached their defenses. Fire consumed part of the northern trench, and soldiers screamed as they burned. Without hesitation, Triss rushed to them. She threw herself into the inferno, her own flames pushing back the chaos long enough to drag men from the wreckage. Her hair was singed, her robes torn, but she saved lives that day. Lives that would never forget the woman with fire in her hands and kindness in her eyes. But heroism has a price. Triss was struck down before the battle's end. A crossbow bolt, poisoned and tipped with steel, found its mark. It tore through her side, and for a moment, she faltered. The flames dimmed. She fell. The world blurred, the sounds of battle fading into a dull roar. She remembered only fragments. Yennefer's voice shouting her name, the cold earth against her cheek, the taste of blood, and then darkness. When the battle finally ended, Sodden Hill was a graveyard. Nilfgaard had been stopped, but at a terrible cost. The ground was littered with bodies, the air thick with ash and smoke. Of the 13 mages who had stood at the hill's crest, only a handful survived. The rest were gone, their names etched into history as the heroes of Sodden. Triss's name was among them. The North believed her dead. Her name was carved into the stone memorial that still stands at the base of the hill. The 14th of Sodden, they called her, the young sorceress who had given her life to stop the darkness. But Triss did not die. She awoke days later, her wounds barely healed, her body weak but alive. Yennefer had saved her, dragging her from the battlefield despite her own injuries. When Triss opened her eyes, she was not met with cheers or celebrations, only silence and the knowledge that so many others had not survived. The title 14th of Sodden stayed with her. She wore it not as an honor, but as a reminder of what was lost and what was worth protecting. The battle had changed her. She was no longer the young, idealistic girl who had left Aretuza. She had seen the true face of war, and though it terrified her, it also steeled her resolve. She swore then that her magic would not only be a weapon, it would be a shield. And though the continent would soon face even darker days, Triss Merigold's fire would never falter. Chapter 4. Bonds of Destiny. The scars of Sodden Hill never fully healed. For Triss, they were not just marks on her body. They were shadows on her heart. Yet, even as she recovered from the wounds of war, the world moved forward. The northern kingdoms licked their wounds, rebuilding cities and raising new armies, while Nilfgaard prepared for another strike. And amid all this chaos, Triss found herself drawn into the lives of two people who would change her fate: Geralt of Rivia and Ciri. Triss had crossed paths with Geralt before. Their world was small, a web of kings, sorcerers, and destiny, where everyone's story eventually intertwined. She knew of him as the White Wolf, the Witcher, who refused to bow to anyone, yet carried the weight of others' burdens. He was unlike the nobles she counseled, unlike the soldiers she healed. His eyes, pale cat-like, carried not only mutation, but an odd, quiet melancholy. After Sodden, their bond deepened. Geralt, too, had seen death on a scale that few could comprehend. In Triss, he recognized a survivor, someone who did not fight for glory, but because there was no other choice. She, in turn, admired his unwavering sense of purpose, his ability to navigate a world that constantly sought to break him. But where there is admiration, the seeds of affection can grow. Triss never intended to love Geralt. He was close to Yennefer, and Yennefer was her friend. Not always kind, not always easy to love, but a friend nonetheless. And yet, when Geralt lost his memory, when Yennefer was far away and the world seemed uncertain, Triss allowed herself to feel what she had long buried. Their relationship during those months was both tender and tragic. It was built not on lies, but on the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, Geralt could see her, truly see her, as more than Yennefer's shadow. But deep down, Triss knew. She knew his heart belonged elsewhere. And when his memory returned, when the truth reasserted itself, she did not fight it. She did not beg. She stepped aside, quietly, with grace.
If Geralt was a storm, Ciri was the lightning that split the sky. The girl, pale-haired, fierce-eyed, entered their lives not as a choice, but as destiny. The child of surprise, the one who carried elder blood in her veins, the one whom prophecy named as the Shaper of Worlds. Triss met Ciri at Kaer Morhen, the ancient keep of the Witchers. It was a place of scars and silence, but also of learning. When Geralt brought Ciri there, Triss came to help. Not because she had to, but because the girl needed someone who understood what it meant to carry power. Triss became like an older sister to Ciri. She cared for her, comforted her through nightmares, and taught her about the world beyond swords and potions. Where the Witchers were harsh and practical, Triss offered warmth. She saw the fear in Ciri's eyes, the burden of a destiny too great for a child, and she vowed to protect her, not as a pawn, but as a person. Ciri loved her for it. The time at Kaer Morhen was brief, but it left an imprint on them all. The Witchers, stoic and unyielding, grew to respect the sorceress with fire in her hands and compassion in her heart. Even Vesemir, gruff and suspicious of most mages, trusted her judgment. Yet Triss knew that Kaer Morhen was only a refuge, not a home. Sooner or later, the storm would find them. Ciri's bloodline was too valuable, her power too dangerous. There were those Nilfgaardian agents, sorcerers with dark intentions, even the Wild Hunt, who would stop at nothing to claim her. When the time came to take Ciri from Kaer Morhen, Triss was the one who argued for it. She believed that Ciri needed to be among people who could help her grow, who could teach her to control the chaos inside her. Though Geralt disagreed at first, he eventually trusted Triss's wisdom. Her relationship with Yennefer during this time was complicated. Triss loved Geralt in a quiet, unspoken way. Yennefer loved him with a fire that could consume. The two sorceresses were often at odds, not because they despised each other, but because they understood each other too well. Both were powerful, both scarred, both bound to a man who seemed incapable of belonging to anyone. Yet, despite this tension, there was respect. Triss never sought to hurt Yennefer, and Yennefer, though jealous, knew Triss's heart was not malicious. Their bond was like a blade's edge, sharp, dangerous, but impossible to sever.
When Ciri's life was endangered again, Triss's loyalty never wavered. She risked everything, her position in Temeria, her place in the Lodge of Sorceresses, to protect the girl. For Triss, Ciri was not just a symbol of power or prophecy. She was a child who needed love, guidance, and freedom from the chains of destiny. In those moments, Triss showed who she truly was, not a manipulator, not a schemer, but a protector. Her story with Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri would always remain one of the defining chapters of her life. Even after she stepped away, even after she chose her own path, a part of her heart remained with them. She would later reflect on those days not with regret, but with gratitude. For in their company she had found something rare, a sense of belonging, a kind of family, even if fleeting. But destiny does not rest, and the world of sorceresses, of kings and empires was far from finished with Triss Merigold. Chapter 5. Between Love and War. The years following Sodden and Kaer Morhen were turbulent not only for the North, but for Triss herself. She had walked through fire, healed countless wounds, and stood between kings and their downfall. Yet now she found herself at the crossroads of love, loyalty, and the relentless politics of sorceresses. The Lodge of Sorceresses grew more powerful with each passing season. Philippa Eilhart, cunning and calculating, wove plans so intricate that even other mages could barely follow the threads. The Lodge's aim was to create a world shaped by magic, not by the chaos of kings or the brutality of war, but by intellect, strategy, and subtle manipulation. It was a vision of order, but one built on deception. Triss remained a member of the Lodge, but her heart was never fully in its schemes. Philippa trusted her less than she trusted the others, not because Triss lacked power, but because she lacked ruthlessness. Triss did not play the Game of Thrones with a knife behind her back. Her strength was something different, something softer. It was this softness, however, that often placed her at odds with her sisters of the Lodge. While the Lodge plotted, Nilfgaard returned. The Second Northern War was not a question of if, but when. Emir Var Emrys, the White Flame, did not forget his ambitions. His armies marched north again, this time with greater discipline and cruelty. Entire towns burned under the black sun of Nilfgaard's banners. Refugees fled by the thousands, bringing tales of unspeakable horrors. Triss found herself once more at the heart of the storm. In Temeria, King Foltest relied on her guidance. She advised him on strategy, on alliances, and on the dangerous balance of power between kingdoms. Yet, war was not her only battle. There was Geralt. Geralt had returned to her life like a ghost from a dream. For months, he had wandered without memory, without ties to the past. During that time, Triss was his anchor. She cared for him, stood by him, and, in the moments when the loneliness became too much, she allowed herself to love him. It was never simple. Triss knew that Yennefer's shadow loomed over them. Even without his memories, Geralt was haunted by a sense of someone else, someone sharp, untamed, and unforgettable. Triss tried to push the thought aside. She told herself that what they shared was real, and in a way, it was. Their time together was warm, honest in its own way, born not of lies, but of the fragile hope that two broken people could find solace in each other. When his memory returned, the truth struck like a blade. Geralt still cared for her. She knew that. But his heart, his soul, belonged elsewhere. To Yennefer. It always had. And so, with quiet dignity, Triss stepped back. She did not fight for him. She did not curse Yennefer or blame Geralt. She simply accepted what was. Her love was unreturned, but not unvalued. Even as she wrestled with her own feelings, the war demanded everything from her. Nilfgaard's spies crept through Temeria, sowing discord. Battles flared along the Yaruga. Triss spent sleepless nights healing the wounded, tending to soldiers broken in both body and spirit. She became a symbol of hope to those who fought for their homes, a flame in the dark. Yet, her role in the lodge forced her to act against her instincts. Philippa and the other sorceresses saw Ciri as a weapon, a tool of unimaginable power. They spoke of controlling her, of binding her destiny to their plans. Triss hated it. She hated the way they looked at the girl, like a key to a door only they could open. She tried to shield Ciri, but her voice was often drowned out. The lodge had its own agenda, and Triss's compassion was a hindrance in their eyes. More than once, she considered leaving, walking away. But leaving the lodge meant abandoning any chance to influence its plans from within, and so she stayed. During this time, her friendship with Geralt became complicated once more. They fought side by side against Nilfgaard, protected Ciri from forces that would use her, and confronted horrors that few could comprehend. There were moments, fleeting, fragile, when Triss wished things could be different, when she wished Geralt might look at her not as a friend, but as something more. But love, she had learned, was not a fire that could be forced to burn. It either burned on its own, or it turned to ash. Triss's greatest strength remained her healing. While other sorceresses focused on destruction, she saved lives. She was often found on battlefields after the fighting had ceased, moving among the wounded like a ghost of warmth and light. Her touch soothed pain, her magic knitting together flesh and bone. Soldiers who would have died in agony lived because of her. Yet each life she saved reminded her of the lives she couldn't. The war took its toll on her, not just physically but emotionally. She saw the same faces, young men, barely older than Ciri, lying broken on the ground.
She heard the same cries of fear and grief, and she wondered, sometimes, if the Lodge's games were worth the blood spilled. Her relationship with the Lodge continued to fracture. Philippa pushed harder for control over the kingdoms, weaving plots that involved assassinations, betrayals, and marriages of convenience. Triss spoke against these plans, but her voice was often silenced. She became known as the Heart of the Lodge, a title that was meant as a compliment, but carried the unspoken meaning that she was not ruthless enough to lead. She didn't mind. Leadership, as the Lodge defined it, meant sacrifice of one's soul. Triss refused to sacrifice hers.
Through it all, her bond with Ciri remained unshakable. Even as the girl grew older, more independent and more powerful, Triss continued to see her as the frightened child she had once cared for at Kaer Morhen. She watched Ciri's path with pride, fear, and love. She knew that Ciri's destiny was greater than any of them, greater than the Lodge, greater than the North, greater even than Nilfgaard. And yet, if Ciri ever needed her, Triss would be there, without question, without hesitation. The war between love and duty raged in her heart as fiercely as the war between kingdoms. She was torn between her feelings for Geralt, her loyalty to Yennefer, her duty to Temeria, and her discomfort with the Lodge. But through it all, one truth remained. Triss Merigold's fire was not meant to consume. It was meant to guide. And in the darkest hours of the continent, her light would be needed more than ever. Chapter 6. Healer and Fighter. Triss Merigold was never the kind of sorceress who thrived in the shadows of power. Unlike Philippa, who loved weaving webs of intrigue, or Ciri, who delighted in subtle manipulation, Triss found her purpose not in politics, but in people. She had seen enough war to understand that magic, though capable of unimaginable destruction, could also heal not just wounds of the body, but the quiet, invisible wounds of the soul. In the years following the Second Northern War, the continent was a scarred landscape. Villages had been burned to the ground, forests blackened, and entire cities reduced to rubble. Refugees fled in endless waves, carrying stories of loss and devastation. Kings plotted revenge, while the common folk struggled simply to survive. Triss could not ignore their suffering. She became a symbol of hope to those who had none. In Temeria, she was more than just an advisor to King Foltest. She was a bridge between the throne and the people. When plague struck the outskirts of Vizima, it was Triss who went into the streets, unafraid, healing the sick and purifying the tainted water with her magic. When soldiers returned from the front lines, broken and bloodied, it was Triss who sat with them, speaking softly as she mended shattered limbs and burned flesh. She never saw herself as a hero. If anything, she felt the weight of each life she couldn't save more than the one she did. But to the people of Temeria, farmers, merchants, children, she was a flame in the dark. They called her the Sorceress with the Warm Hands, a title she accepted with a shy smile. Yet healing alone could not stop the war. Nilfgaard's shadow loomed once more, and whispers of Ymir's plans reached every corner of the north. Triss was drawn back into the games of the Lodge, into strategy meetings where kingdoms were treated like pieces on a board. Philippa argued for decisive action, alliances, manipulation, and, if necessary, assassination. Triss listened, but she did not always agree. Her philosophy was simple. Power meant responsibility. Magic was not meant to crush the weak, but to protect them. And though the Lodge claimed to share that goal, their methods often strayed into cruelty. Triss began to doubt her place among them. Her time with Geralt and Ciri only deepened these doubts. She had seen what destiny could do to a person, how it could twist lives into tools for others to use. The Lodge saw Ciri as an asset, a source of elder blood and unimaginable power. Triss saw her as a girl who deserved freedom, love, and the chance to choose her own path. these differences grew sharper as war consumed the continent once more. The Third Northern War began with blood and fire, Nilfgaard striking hard at Temeria, Edirn, and Kedwin. Triss could not stand idle. Though she was no soldier, she fought in her own way, healing, organizing supply lines, coordinating magical defenses, and ensuring that those on the front lines had a fighting chance. Her abilities as a healer were unmatched. Unlike other sorceresses who viewed healing magic as tedious or beneath them, Triss understood its value. She could close wounds that would otherwise mean death, purge poisons with a touch, and even restore strength to those who had lost hope. It was not glamorous magic. It did not win battles in a flash of light, but it saved lives, and sometimes saving one life meant winning the war. Soldiers trusted her. Even those who feared magic, and there were many, spoke of her with reverence. She was not like the other mages, distant and cold. She knelt beside them, listened to their stories, and treated them as people, not pawns.
But the life of a healer is never easy. Triss saw things she could never unsee. The aftermath of sieges, where the wounded begged for death rather than pain. The children left orphaned, staring with empty eyes. The endless cycle of hatred between the kingdoms, and the knowledge that no amount of healing could fix the deeper wounds of the world. She cried sometimes, not where others could see, but in the quiet moments, when the fires burned low and the night was heavy. She wept for the lives that war had stolen. Even in these dark times, her heart was pulled in many directions. Geralt, as always, was never far from her thoughts. Though she had accepted his love for Yennefer, the feelings she had for him did not simply vanish. It was not just love, but respect for his resilience, his honesty, and the quiet way he carried burdens too heavy for any man. They fought together on more than one occasion, defending villages from monsters both human and otherwise. And though their relationship never returned to what it had once been, there was a bond between them that nothing could break. Triss also remained a steadfast ally to Ciri, even when the girl's path diverged from theirs, even when she became something greater and more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. Triss held faith in her. She believed in Ciri's heart, even when the world only saw her power. The wars continued to rage, but Triss began to see a different kind of battle, one for the future of magic itself. The Lodge, once a council of visionaries, had grown divided. Philippa's ambitions clashed with the desires of others. The Brotherhood of Sorcerers was long gone, destroyed at Thaned, and in its absence, chaos had taken root. Triss tried to act as a mediator, but the more she watched, the clearer it became. Politics would always demand blood, and Triss had shed enough blood. In her quiet moments, she thought of life beyond war, a life where she could simply heal, teach, and live without the constant fear of betrayal or invasion. It was a dream she rarely voiced, even to herself, but it was there. The thought of finding peace, of creating something lasting and kind, burned softly within her. But the continent was not ready for peace. Triss remained where she was needed most, on the battlefields, in the courts, by the side of those who could not defend themselves. Her magic continued to grow, not in destructive power, but in subtlety. She learned how to cure illnesses long thought incurable, how to weave protective barriers that could shield entire villages. Her name became a beacon of hope. And yet, she never forgot Sodden Hill. She never forgot what it meant to stand on the edge of death and refuse to fall. That fire remained with her, steady
and unwavering, even as the world tried to snuff it out. Chapter 7: Legacy of the Sorceress. History often remembers the victors, the kings who claimed thrones, the generals who carved borders with their swords. Sorceresses like Triss Merigold are remembered in fragments, whispered names in old songs, fleeting mentions in chronicles. Yet her legacy is not found in the fire she wielded or the power she held, but in the lives she touched. When the wars that ravaged the north began to cool, when Nilfgaard's grip was loosened through fragile treaties and blood-won truces, Triss stepped away from the endless intrigue of courts and councils, not because she had grown weak, but because she had learned that the greatest victories were not won with manipulation or violence, but with compassion. The Lodge of Sorceresses still held power, though fractured and wary. Philippa Eilhart, with her schemes, continued to weave the future of kings and queens. Sela de Tanserville vanished into her own designs. Kira Metz turned to her own survival, always with one eye on the next opportunity. Triss remained a member of the Lodge, but her path diverged from theirs. She had seen enough of politics, enough of war. Her focus shifted to rebuilding what had been destroyed. While others fought over crowns, Triss returned to the villages and towns still marked by the scars of war. She healed those whom no one else would heal, peasants with wounds too deep for common medicine, orphans who trembled at every sound of boots on the road, widows who had lost everything. She gave her time freely, asking for nothing in return. And in doing so, she became something more than a sorceress. She became hope. Triss never fully withdrew from the world's affairs. She was too wise for that. She understood that true peace was fragile, always on the brink of shattering. When kings sought her counsel, she gave it, though not always in the ways they expected. She advised not for power or gold, but for the sake of the people who would suffer under their decisions. This earned her both respect and suspicion. Some rulers saw her as a threat, as all powerful women were seen in those days. Others saw her as a blessing, a voice of reason in a world of ambition. Her connection to Temeria, and especially to King Foltest, remained strong until his death. Foltest, for all his flaws, trusted her judgment. He knew she did not seek to manipulate him, but to protect his kingdom. When Vizima was plagued by unrest, Triss was there to prevent chaos from becoming open war. She negotiated between factions, her words as steady and warm as her magic. But for all her influence, her heart remained bound to a smaller circle, to Geralt, to Yennefer, and most of all to Ciri. Ciri had grown far beyond the frightened girl Triss once held at Kaer Morhen. She had walked through fire, through time itself, and returned as something extraordinary, a witcher, a princess, a child of destiny. And yet still the same girl who once sought comfort in Triss's arms during sleepless nights. Their bond was unspoken, but unbreakable. Even when Ciri's path diverged, Triss always considered her something like family. Geralt, too, remained a quiet presence in her life. Their love, if it could be called that, was complicated, marked by longing and unspoken apologies. Triss never tried to steal him from Yennefer again. She had learned that love was not possession, and that true affection sometimes meant stepping aside. Still, there were moments when they fought together, moments when their eyes met, and an understanding passed between them, a shared history, a respect that needed no words. Over time, stories of Triss began to spread beyond the borders of Temeria. Bards sang of the 14th of Sodden, of the sorceress who brought fire against Nilfgaard and survived. Yet these tales rarely spoke of her healing,
of the countless nameless lives she saved. Perhaps that was as it should be. Heroic deeds are rarely quiet, and Triss's greatest acts were often unseen. She cared little for fame. To her, the work itself was enough. In the years following the wars, Triss took on a new role, that of mentor. She returned often to Aretuza, not as a student, but as a teacher. She knew the harsh lessons that had been drilled into her as a young woman, and she vowed to teach differently. Where her instructors had been cold and unforgiving, she was patient. She taught not just the mechanics of magic, but the ethics of it, the understanding that power is meaningless without compassion. Some students loved her for it. Others found her too soft. But none could deny that her lessons lingered long after she left the room. It was said that when Triss taught, her magic filled the air like the warmth of a hearth. Even the most frightened novice would feel at ease in her presence. Yet life as a sorceress was never free of danger. The continent remained a place of shifting power, of kings who feared mages and mobs who called for their blood. Triss was no stranger to hatred. She had seen friends burned at the stake, accused of witchcraft by those too ignorant to understand the difference between magic and malice. She knew that any day could bring the same fate for her, but she refused to hide. Better to burn for what you are, she once said, than to live in shadows pretending to be less. Her legacy is not written in the chronicles of kings or in the records of the Lodge. It lives in the stories told by those she saved. A farmer in Vizima, whose child survived a deadly fever because of her hands. A soldier who returned from war with both his body and his hope intact. A young sorceress who found courage in her lessons. And of course in Ciri, who carried with her a piece of Triss's heart, a quiet reminder of the woman who once stood between her and the darkness of the world. Even as the years passed, Triss remained a flame that refused to dim. Not the consuming fire of war, but the steady warmth of a hearth, a place of safety, of healing, of trust. She was never the most famous, nor the most feared, but those who truly knew her understood that her strength lay not in her magic alone, but in her heart.